Please, I invite you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a specific sound from your earliest youth. Perhaps it is the rhythmic, metallic ticking of a precious mechanical watch in a quiet room, or the sharp, cheerful ringing of a heavy steel bicycle bell cutting through the crisp morning mist. Or maybe it is a smell, the faint earthy scent of damp coal dust, or the sweet fragrance of a worn palm leaf fan swaying gently in the summer heat. Today, my dear friends, we are taking a journey back in time. We are returning to the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s in China. We will be looking at 20 everyday habits and rituals from our youth that might completely shock the modern world. But to us, they were just life. We will remember the struggles, but more importantly, we will remember the incredible warmth of those days. And wait until the very end, because the last memory we will share is something so beautifully simple, it might just bring a tear of sweet nostalgia to your eye. When we look back at those decades, we must remember that time itself seemed to flow differently. The hours moved slower, without the frantic rushing that consumes our modern world. In those days, waiting was an art form. We waited in long lines for grain. We waited weeks for a letter to arrive from a distant province, and we waited all year for a new set of clothes. Many younger people today look back at the 1960s and 70s and assume that because we lacked modern technologies, our lives must have been impoverished. But they misunderstand the heart of that era. What we lacked in material wealth, we made up for with an overwhelming abundance of human connection. The neighborhood was an extended family. We shared everything from tools to gossip, from a pinch of salt to our deepest worries. The absence of screens meant we actually looked at each other. We lived incredibly rich, emotional lives, grounded in sincerity, resilience, and a profound sense of community that the modern world has sadly left behind. Let us begin with something that was the absolute center of survival and daily anxiety. The tiny, colorful slips of paper known as food ration coupons. If you grew up in this era, you know exactly what I am talking about. Imagine walking into a dimly lit, state-run grain store. The air is heavy with the dry, dusty, comforting scent of raw rice, wheat, and flour. In your hand, you are clutching these fragile, incredibly precious rectangles of paper. These were not just pieces of paper. They were life itself. Every single meal, every single grain of rice depended on your family's allocation. Losing a sheet of these coupons was a genuine tragedy, something that could cause a mother to weep and a father to pace the floor all night. Today, people tap a piece of glass to have endless amounts of food delivered to their door. But back then, carefully organizing, trading, and calculating those small paper coupons taught us the true, irreplaceable value of a single bowl of white rice. We learned never to waste a crumb, a lesson that lives in our hearts to this very day. And now let us remember the great winter ritual of storing the massive green and white heads of winter cabbage. In the modern world, people go to a bright supermarket and buy one small vegetable wrapped in plastic. But in the 1960s and 70s, autumn brought an entirely different, monumental task. Entire city streets and narrow alleyways would be lined with literally hundreds of pounds of winter cabbage for just one family. Do you remember the cold, crisp smell of the autumn frost as you helped your parents carry these heavy vegetables up the stairs? We would carefully lay them out to dry in the sun, turning them gently so they would not rot. Then we would stack them high in the hallways, on balconies, and under beds, sometimes wrapping them in old, crinkled newspapers. That distinct smell of slowly aging cabbage permeated every apartment building for months. It was a chaotic, exhausting time, but it was a shared neighborhood event. It meant security. It meant that no matter how harsh the freezing winds outside became, your family would have food in their bowls. Let us move to a daily morning ritual that seems completely alien to the youth of today. The hot water boiler station. Before every home had running hot water, we relied on the community boiler. Picture the colorful array of tall tin and glass thermos flasks, painted with bright peonies or red stars, lined up in the early morning light. You can still hear the squeak of the cork stoppers and the loud hissing roar of the boiling water pouring from the massive brass spigots. Going to fetch hot water was never just a chore. It was the social center of the morning. It was where the neighborhood grandmothers exchanged the latest news, where you found out who was getting married and who was feeling ill. Walking carefully back home, balancing two heavy, steaming thermoses in the freezing winter air, your hands would feel the radiating warmth through the thin metal handles. Today, hot water flows endlessly from a tap, but we have lost that steaming, noisy, wonderful daily gathering of neighbors. Do you recall the profound pride of owning a bicycle? Not just any bicycle, but a heavy black steel machine like a flying pigeon or a Forever brand. In those days, a bicycle was not a toy or a simple piece of exercise equipment. It was the ultimate symbol of wealth, freedom, and family pride. It was one of the legendary 3 major items required for a respectable household. I can still picture the devoted fathers spending their Sunday afternoons in the courtyard, carefully polishing the black metal frame with a soft, oily rag until it shined like a mirror. The sharp, clear ring of the metal bell was the soundtrack of the city streets. Whole families would travel on one bicycle, a child sitting on the top tube, a wife riding side saddle on the sturdy rear rack. When it rained, we would frantically wipe the mud off the spokes to prevent rust. We treated those magnificent steel machines with more care and reverence than people treat luxury cars today, because we knew just how many years of saving it took to bring it home. Another vivid memory is the humble enamel mug. Almost everyone had one, resting on their wooden desk or sitting on the dining table. They were usually white, rimmed with a thin line of blue or green, often bearing a painted red star or an inspirational slogan in bright red characters. Over the years, the paint would chip away, revealing the dark iron beneath, but we never threw them out. Those chips were just battle scars of a life well lived. Do you remember the distinct, hollow, clinking sound the metal lid made when you placed it back on the cup? Inside there was always a handful of loose, dark tea leaves, steeping endlessly in hot water, growing stronger and more bitter as the long day wore on. Your fingers would wrap around the warm curve of the mug during a cold evening, bringing comfort and heat to your tired hands. Today, people buy disposable paper cups and throw them away an hour later. But our chipped, dented enamel mugs were lifelong companions, holding the warmth of our daily tea and the memories of our quiet moments. And who could forget the booming, crackling voices of the public loudspeakers? For those who grew up in the 1960s and 70s, our days did not begin with a gentle digital alarm clock. They began with a sudden loud burst of static from a gray metal horn mounted high on a wooden utility pole. Then, the triumphant, soaring music of patriotic songs would echo through every street, alley, and courtyard. The entire town woke up at the exact same moment. We did our morning calisthenics together, moving our arms and legs in unison to the rhythmic counting of the broadcaster. The loudspeakers told us when it was time to eat, when it was time to work, and when the day was done. It is hard to explain to someone today how it felt to have your entire life synchronized with thousands of your neighbors. Though it was loud and sometimes overwhelming, there was an incredible sense of belonging in knowing that everyone around you was moving, working, and resting to the very same heartbeat. Let us reflect on a harsh but deeply nostalgic winter chore. Making and storing honeycomb coal briquettes. Before central heating, these heavy black cylinders with holes punched through them were the only thing standing between us and the bitter, biting cold. The process of making them was a messy, exhausting ritual. We would mix jet-black coal dust with sticky yellow mud and water, our hands and faces quickly becoming covered in a thick layer of dark soot. Then we would use an iron mold to press them into shape, leaving them out in the weak winter sun to dry. Do you remember the sharp, sulfurous smell of the burning coal in the small cast-iron stoves? It was a smell that permeated our heavy cotton jackets and our hair. Getting the fire started in the morning required patience, gently blowing on the embers until they glowed red. It was dirty, back-breaking work, but when you sat close to that little stove on a freezing January night, eating roasted sweet potatoes cooked right on the edge of the iron, it felt like the greatest luxury in the world. There was a popular saying back then regarding our clothing: new for 3 years, old for 3 years, and patched for 3 years. Today, clothes are cheap, and if a shirt gets a tiny tear, it is immediately thrown into the garbage. But in our youth, fabrics like dacron and simple cotton were incredibly precious. Nearly everyone wore the same subdued colors of blue, green, and gray. We did not mind the lack of variety, because keeping those clothes neat and presentable was a point of immense dignity. Can you hear the rhythmic, rapid clicking of the foot-pedal sewing machine late at night? Mothers and grandmothers would stay up under a dim, yellow light bulb, carefully matching threads to stitch over worn-out elbows and knees. A neatly sewn patch was a sign of a caring household. When clothes could absolutely no longer be worn, they were not discarded. They were meticulously cut into small squares, layered together with homemade paste, and transformed into thick, durable soles for cloth shoes. Every single thread was respected and utilized to its absolute limit. Let us turn our memories to a source of pure childhood joy: the palm-sized comic books. In a time long before televisions, video games, or mobile phones, these tiny, incredibly detailed, illustrated books were our entire universe. Do you remember finding a small, makeshift street stall, usually set up by an old man under the shade of a large tree? For just 1 or 2 small copper coins, you could rent a book for the afternoon. We would sit on tiny, wobbly wooden stools, or just crouch directly on the dusty pavement, completely absorbed in stories of ancient heroes, brave soldiers, and legendary battles. The paper was often thin, yellowed, and smelled wonderfully of dust and old ink. The edges were worn soft by thousands of tiny, eager thumbs turning the pages. We would trade them with our friends, memorizing every single illustration. Those small books sparked our imaginations in a way that modern high-definition screens simply cannot replicate, because we had to fill in the missing colors and the sounds with our own minds. And speaking of entertainment, there was absolutely nothing more magical than the announcement of an open-air cinema night. When the news spread through the village or the neighborhood, an electric excitement would fill the air. Long before the sun even began to set, we would rush to the large dirt clearing, carrying heavy, creaking bamboo stools from our homes, desperately trying to claim a good spot close to the front. We would watch in awe as the projectionist hung a massive, stark white square of cloth between 2 sturdy trees. As twilight fell, the loud, clicking whir of the heavy film projector would start, casting a blinding beam of light through the dark, dusty air. The whole community would be there. You could smell the roasted sunflower seeds, the sweet smoke of cheap cigarettes, and the mosquito coils burning gently in the grass. We watched the same films over and over, reciting the lines along with the actors. The flickering light dancing across the faces of hundreds of spellbound neighbors is a beautiful image of pure unity that will live in my mind forever. Let us recall the experience of traveling on the iconic green-skinned trains. If you ever took a long journey in the 1970s or 80s, you know this was not merely a mode of transport. It was a profound trial of endurance and community. These massive, slow-moving beasts of iron were painted a dark military green. Inside, the hard, straight-backed wooden seats offered almost zero comfort. The carriages were packed far beyond capacity, with people sitting on the floors, in the aisles, and sometimes even resting in the luggage racks above. But despite the terrible crowding, the overwhelming heat in summer, and the freezing drafts in winter, there was magic there. The rhythmic, repetitive clack-clack of the steel wheels on the tracks was mesmerizing. Strangers shared whatever food they had, passing hard-boiled eggs, thick steamed buns, and warm tea in glass jars across the aisles. The carriage smelled of cheap tobacco, instant noodles, and unwashed bodies. But by the end of a 3-day journey, the people sitting around you had transformed from total strangers into old friends. Let us shift to a very personal yet very public memory: the community bathhouses. In an era where private bathrooms with hot showers were practically unheard of, the public bathhouse was a vital weekly ritual, especially in the freezing depths of winter. Stepping inside, you were immediately hit by an impenetrable wall of hot, thick, damp steam that instantly fogged up your glasses and clung to your skin. The air echoed with a cacophony of sounds: the splashing of water in deep tiled pools, the hollow scraping of wooden clogs on wet stone floors, and the loud, rhythmic slapping of rough washcloths as people rigorously scrubbed each other's backs. It was a place of complete vulnerability and absolute equality. Underneath the hot water, a factory manager and a street sweeper were exactly the same. Do you remember the incredible feeling of stepping back out into the freezing winter street afterward? Your skin would be glowing red, completely deeply cleansed, and you felt lighter, as if the heavy burdens of the long work week had been washed away down the drain. Do you remember the beautiful painted metal biscuit tins? Once the sweet, precious treats inside were finally eaten, often taking months because they were reserved only for special guests, the tin took on a far more important second life. These sturdy metal boxes became the family's most secure and trusted safe. Hidden deep inside the dark wooden wardrobe, or shoved safely beneath a heavy cotton quilt under the bed, the biscuit tin held the family's greatest treasures. Opening it was a serious, almost sacred act. Inside, smelling faintly of old sugar and dry metal, you would find tightly rolled bundles of cash, the vital grain and cloth coupons, faded black and white photographs of distant relatives, and perhaps a single piece of modest jewelry. When the lid was carefully pried open with a dull knife, the quiet metallic pop was the sound of a family checking their security. In today's world of digital banking and plastic cards, the physical weight of a biscuit tin full of hard-earned savings feels like a tangible, beautiful piece of lost history. Let us take a moment to appreciate the relentless, loving labor of hand-knitting sweaters. Winter clothing was expensive and scarce, so mothers and grandmothers took matters into their own hands, literally. Do you remember the sight of bright, colorful yarn stretched tight across the backs of 2 wooden dining chairs? Or perhaps you were the one asked to hold your arms out wide while your mother quickly wound the yarn into neat, tight balls. The rhythmic, dry clicking of long bamboo knitting needles was a constant evening soundtrack. Nothing was ever wasted. When a sweater became too small or too worn, the whole thing would be meticulously unraveled. The crinkled, used yarn would be washed, steamed flat in a pot, and then painstakingly re-knitted into something entirely new. Those sweaters were sometimes bulky, sometimes a little itchy, and often featured slightly mismatched colors, but they were woven with an absolute, fierce love. When you put on a heavy, hand-knitted sweater on a freezing morning, you were literally wrapping yourself in your mother's care. We must also remember the watchful eyes and the bustling energy of the neighborhood committee elders. These were usually retired men and women, proudly wearing bright red armbands pinned to their padded jackets. They were the undisputed guardians of the alleyways and courtyards, Some modern people might view them as intrusive, but back then, they were the glue that held the community together. They organized the morning sweeping of the communal streets, making sure every stone was free of dust. If a young couple was fighting, the committee elders would march right into their home, sitting them down with tea to aggressively mediate the dispute until peace was restored. They knew everyone's name, everyone's schedule, and everyone's troubles. Because of them, crime was incredibly rare. You could leave your wooden door wide open on a hot summer afternoon and never fear that anything would be stolen. They provided a profound, comforting sense of security, ensuring that no one in the neighborhood was ever truly isolated or forgotten. Let us revisit the rare, formal occasion of visiting a state-run photographic studio. Taking a picture was not something you did every day with a small device in your pocket. It was an event that required serious planning and your absolute best clothing. Can you remember the distinct chemical smell of the darkroom developing fluids that lingered in the studio air? The massive, intimidating wooden camera sat heavy on a large tripod, and glaring hot studio lamps were pointed directly at your face. The photographer would command you to sit incredibly still, adjusting the angle of your chin by mere millimeters. We posed against beautiful, dramatically painted canvas backdrops, featuring idyllic mountains or modern bridges. If it was a special portrait, the studio artist would later use tiny brushes to painstakingly hand-paint delicate pink rouge onto the cheeks of the black and white photograph. Those stiff, unsmiling portraits, now yellowing at the edges, captured a serious dignity that modern instant selfies will simply never possess. Do you remember the surprisingly common habit of obsessively saving empty toothpaste tubes? In the 1960s and 70s, toothpaste did not come in cheap plastic tubes like it does today. The tubes were made of soft, pliable metals like lead and aluminum. When the paste was almost gone, we did not simply throw the tube in the trash. We would lay it flat on the wooden table and forcefully scrape the back of a metal spoon heavily against it, pushing every last microscopic drop of paste to the top. When it was finally truly empty, the metal tube became a valuable commodity. Children would collect them, flattening them out completely, and trade them to the roaming scrap metal peddlers who wandered the streets calling out for junk. In exchange for a handful of these crinkled metal tubes, a child could receive a tiny piece of malt sugar candy or a few precious coins. It taught us a brilliant, necessary resourcefulness, proving that absolutely nothing in our homes was without value if you were clever enough to save it. Let us think back to the simple, sometimes harsh rituals of personal grooming, specifically washing our hair. Long before the shelves were lined with dozens of scented, foamy shampoos in plastic bottles, we relied on what nature and basic chemistry provided. Many families used the pods of the soap locust tree. I can still remember the smell of those dark brown pods boiling in an iron pot on the stove, releasing a raw, earthy, slightly medicinal scent into the air. Or we used dense, rough bars of highly alkaline soap that smelled strongly of lye. We would lean over a dented tin wash basin filled with warm water, vigorously scrubbing our scalps. It did not create luxurious bubbles, and it often left your hair feeling stiff and incredibly squeaky when wet. But when it dried in the afternoon sun, your hair was unbelievably clean. There was no fuss, no artificial perfumes, just a straightforward, honest cleanliness that stripped away the heavy dust of the city streets. We must remember the immense pressure and ultimate pride surrounding the preparations for marriage, specifically the quest for the 3 major items. During those decades, a young man wishing to marry had to prove his worth by providing a bicycle, a sewing machine, and a wristwatch. Securing all 3 was a monumental task that often required years of saving and calling in favors for the right purchasing coupons. The wristwatch, often a shining silver Shanghai brand, was particularly treasured. Strapping that heavy mechanical timepiece to your wrist felt like you were finally wearing adulthood itself. Bringing the polished sewing machine into the new bridal chamber was a promise of a warm, well-clothed future. The frantic search for these items, the negotiations, and the ultimate triumph of gathering them together made the marriage feel deeply earned. It was not just about material goods. It was about proving your profound commitment and your ability to sacrifice for the future of your new family. And finally, let us remember the most beautiful, peaceful ritual of all. The summer evenings in the shared courtyard. Before air conditioning trapped people inside behind closed doors, the blazing heat of a summer night drove everyone outdoors. After dinner, the entire neighborhood would gather in the open air. The adults would carry out bamboo lounge chairs and small wooden stools. Do you remember the gentle, rhythmic swishing sound of the large, woven palm leaf fans swaying back and forth in the warm, heavy air? The distinctive, slightly smoky scent of green mosquito coils burned quietly in the corners. Someone would pull a massive, dark green watermelon from the deep well, where it had been chilling in the cold water all day, and slice it open, the sweet red juice dripping down our chins. The older folks would sit under the bright stars, smoking long pipes and telling old stories, while the children chased fireflies in the dark. In those moments, surrounded by the laughter and the quiet murmurs of our neighbors, we had very little money, but our hearts were overwhelmingly, completely full. When we look back at these 20 habits, we realize a profound truth. We do not just miss the physical things. We do not miss the heavy bicycles, the harsh soaps, or the bitter cold of a coal stove. What we truly, deeply miss is the way we felt when we were young. We miss the slow, measured pace of time. We miss the absolute necessity of relying on one another. A necessity that forced us to build unbreakable bonds with our neighbors, our friends, and our families. We miss an era where love was shown through the meticulous knitting of a sweater, or the sharing of a precious food coupon, rather than a quick text message on a screen. If this video brought a warm smile to your face, or perhaps a gentle tear to your eye, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Now I want to ask you, which of these beautiful, forgotten rituals sparked the strongest memory for you? Did your family have a special biscuit tin? Or do you remember the exact sound of your local loudspeaker? Please, write your personal stories in the comments below. Let us read them, remember together, and keep the precious warmth of our youth alive.